Hey guys, John here. So today's video is going to be about a Workhorse synth. Now, obviously you can see Avenger on my screen, so it's no surprise. But there's a couple things I wanted to talk about because we've done videos where we're saying, okay, this synth is for that. I like using this synth for maybe retro stuff, or I want an analog sound, right? So we're going to reach for diva, or I like pigments because the modulation, things like that, right? But we haven't really sat down and kind of discussed what a workhorse synth is, at least in my opinion, and what it should be for us, right? So I wrote down quite a few things for this video because I was kind of thinking about this the other day, and there's synthesizers that we're going to pull out for different things, for different reasons, but I think we should all have one in our toolkit that is really kind of like the Swiss Army knife, but a good one at that, and yeah, our workhorse synth that we can kind of rely on for any obscure things or maybe some weird sound design stuff that we can't really do in certain things, right? If you want a wavetable synth, you're not going to reach for diva, obviously. If you want an analog emulation, you'd probably want to reach for it, right? So that kind of concept. So I came up with a couple different things. So like what exactly is a workhorse synth for me, right? So some of the criteria are it's got to be a good UI. That is such a huge thing, I think, for at least for me, and I would imagine for everybody else out there, right? You have to have a user interface that actually feels good to use. It, things are kind of in the spots that you would expect them to be. They're accessible, stuff like that, right? Now, obviously, as well, the features, right? Because if you want to have a workhorse synth, they need to have a lot of features that kind of just, that kind of goes with the territory. And the second one are going to be the different synth types, right? Because we can do stuff, if you want just a basic subtractive synth, you can go for a lot of different options. Maybe you want a certain wavetable one. Maybe you want to get into additive synthesizers or frequency modulation, stuff like that. There's going to be different features of synths, and maybe you want to have all those one kind of in one synth, right? And then also, I think one of the last criteria here, in probably maybe one of the most important, is the fun aspect, right? Because if we're designing sound and we're making cool stuff, you got to have fun. This can't be a frustrating thing where you're like, oh, I don't like this. You're kind of working against the grain. You're trying to make some sounds, but it's just not a fun process. It might sound good. It might sound okay. The UI might be okay, but if you're not having fun at the end of the day making these sounds and having your speakers up, your headphones on, and discovering cool stuff and just having a good time, then you get diminished results or returns or whatever that saying is. So yeah, the fun aspect I think is very important. So there's a couple synthesizers out there that can cover a lot of these grounds, right? So you can definitely go with something like Falcon. You can go with Faceplant, obviously Avenger, and there's probably other ones that I can't think of off the top of my head, but these different synths are more than just like a synthesizer. They're workstations, they're workhorses. You can do so much. Even Zebra can do a lot of things and it sounds great. So I was thinking about this. I'm like, which one kind of fits all these criterias, right? The UI. So in Avenger, I do like that the UI for the most part is on like one global page, right? So if we're looking at this screen here, I have my oscillator section already built out here for us, so we can always look and reference. Then we have our amps over here. We have our filters. And yeah, there's some tab stuff. If we want another filter, we just go to a different tab. But it's not like we're diving into so many crazy different menus and this and that, right? It's right in front of our face. We can see the modulation going. And then down over here, we have the shaper, which is kind of cool. It's always there. It's a really nice distortion unit. And then we have our mod matrix down over here as well, which is kind of cool to glance. Okay, what's modulating what? We can look at this. We can say, okay, what's going on here? That's nice to see that. And then we have our effects rack over here and our preset browser on the left-hand side. Now, with this kind of setup, I almost feel like the important things are right in front of my face. I don't have to like go out of my way to really find stuff. So the UI for me is pretty cool. And if I want some drums, I have a drums tab and there's all this stuff that switches. Okay, now I'm in drums mode, right? So I can look at the sample of the drums. I have like a tab for like the sequencer, and there's this easy stuff, right? In this drums view, I have my drum kits, I have my sequences, I have my drum routing. So whatever I want to work on, it's not really that far away. The stuff is just kind of right in front of me. So that's one of the first things we wrote down, like a kind of a one-page interface kind of thing. That's pretty cool. So the different synth types, right? So this one can cover it all. We can do our basic subtractive stuff. We can do wavetables. We can bring in samples and do crazy stuff right there. We can do granular. If we want to do some harmonic stuff, we want to adjust things and make an organ or something like that, we can use these bars right in our front to do that. We can bring all of these down. If we want just a sine wave, we have a sine wave, and then we can start like adding this octave here and kind of we can do an additive organ. So it's that fast, which is kind of cool. And there's different modes. We can do some free stuff here if we want to kind of just like draw our own shapes or do something crazy, or down here if we want to really get into things like that and kind of zoom in and really go into detail. So that's definitely pretty cool. So that was kind of the one there's the interface, the multi types of synthesizers, right? And another thing that I'm kind of a stickler about is the filters, right? I think that's one thing that if I'm ever going for like the analog kind of style, like that's why Diva's so good. The filters are extremely good. And especially also in Avenger, I like a lot of these filters inside here. And we can go to these types and we have a lot. Like we have all these low passes, all these high passes. We have band passes, band stops, and we have these special filters that do interesting things that, we can, if we're feeling crazy on a certain day, let's, make some weird waveforms, put some unison, and kind of just explore these different filters and see what kind of results that we're going to get. So that's kind of cool. And we can just keep adding on to these filters and send those to this filter, do parallel or series. So there's a lot of different possibilities. And then they go to a master filter. So it's like you have these 5 filters and then it goes to a master filter, and you can go here and then select all these other ones too. So it gets kind of crazy in the sense of how many filters you have, how much the routing goes, and they do sound really, really good. And a lot of these different knobs can do different things. There's different menus in here that we can kind of go through and really customize the filter as well. We have our key tracking. This envelope has hold, which is actually really nice. I do like that feature. And we have an external source, which again, pretty cool as far as the filter section goes. So moving on from there, let's go back to an initialized preset. Now, when I was first like opening up Avenger and looking at it and like seeing this drums tab, I'm like, okay, so we have a drum sequencer and basically like a drum machine built into a synthesizer. Because for the most part, most synthesizers out there don't necessarily come with a built-in drum machine, right? You can synthesize the drums and then sample them out and kind of work with them how you'd like to. But this has a full-on drum sequencer, and a lot of the kits sound very, very cool. Now, depending on what kind of style you like, maybe you went with a certain expansion that maybe fits your genre that you're trying to make, you get drum kits with that expansion, and you can just use those drum kits entirely and just play around and make an entire drum pattern within the sequencer, or you can multi them out if you'd like to and sequence them in your DAW, put different effects on there. So that's a really cool concept as well. And maybe you have a drum kit that you like or that you downloaded or that you made or something like that. You can bring those inside Avenger and make your own drum kits and just use it like that with all the features this has. So having a full-on drum machine built into a synthesizer with multi-outs at the same time is kind of crazy. I've used a lot of different drum programs, and for the most part, they're pretty cool. And it's kind of nice sometimes to keep things in one package. So I kind of like that aspect as well. So that's kind of a cool thing, which kind of made it my workhorse thing. So the next thing is going to be the effects rack. So if we go back to an initialized preset here, just in case, and we go over here to our effects rack. So we have this whole stack of effects. So we have FX1. So if we look at this here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 of these slots, and we right click, and this is a lot of different effects. And I can tell you that spend a day or a couple days just going over, making a saw wave, maybe put some unison on it, and just play with one certain effect as like your main effect to kind of play around with. Highly suggest this quantum effects. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with that one. So the effects are deep, right? So this is just one effect stack with all these slots that we can start adding stuff. And that's a big thing for synthesizers for me, is let's say I want to put like 4 delays or multiple compressors or something like that. I can do that. So let's say you have all this signal and you're routing this to this first effect stack. Great. So what happens if you have another oscillator that you want to process entirely different? You select this plus here, and then you have FX2 within all these additional slots as well. Then we can go to another effects and another effects. And if that's not enough, we can use send effects as well and put more effects here. And then if that's not enough, we have a master effect to put even more effects on there. And now we can route these in different ways. We can say effects 1 can go to the master effects, or we can route this effects 1. All this stack can now output this signal and go into the beginning of effects 2 if we select 2, and so on and so forth. We can send these out individual auxes, which I've talked about before, where we can basically have a lead, a bass, maybe another ARP or whatever it is that we want, and we can send these all down to effects 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then split those out inside our DAW and then process them however we'd like to. So that's a really cool, flexible feature that I like about this synth. So another thing as well, if we go back to a new preset, is this ARP is ridiculous, right? The stuff you can make with this, and it's very easy to make. You can move these up by octaves. You can move these up by semitones. There's the ratchets feature, which is really, really cool as well. You can have multiple pages here, and you can go with a pattern length up to 32. And then you can, say after A, we can go to B, and that's another 32, and just keep adding on to that, which is really fun. But also this dice down here, this ARP randomizer. So basically with all these different parameters, so we have this node, we have silence, length, octave, velocity, ratchet, connect, and we can basically tell this ARP, say, I want in a random ARP, but I want these specific parameters. Maybe I want something in like a pentatonic scale. And we can go down here and we can select all these different presets and we have all these things to pick from, right? So like major pentatonic, we click these notes and now it's going to randomize these in that scale. Now, let's say, for example, like, okay, we like this, but it's too repetitive. Then we can go to auto dice. So it's going to keep randomizing things with our set parameters of these notes. And now we can come down here and say, okay, I want the randomizing to be only in this certain octave, so 0 and maybe 1. So this is going to be the range here, and then we can put the strength all the way to the top. And now we can say, this is the parameter of the octave changes I want this ARP to be. That's very cool. And we have the velocity here. This kind of like, it might be hard to see on the screen, but we can click down here and increase the velocity, and whatever reacts to velocity can then control that. So if we have like the ARP going to the cutoff, we can increase this velocity slider. So now these velocity changes will affect the filter cutoff, which is pretty cool. Or the amp or the spike or whatever, wherever we see these bars that react to velocity. So the ARP is pretty cool. And not to mention, this is just one. This is one ARP. We can click these plus, and we can keep going and keep clicking this plus here. And it's like, it's ridiculous. You have 8 ARPs in here that you can do whatever it is that you want to. You can route different oscillators to these, route like 3 oscillators to 1 ARP, or route 8 oscillators to these 8 ARPs individually, and make a whole arrangement and make them all random. So it's like, it comes to a point where it's almost so much stuff that you don't really know what else you want to do, but all the possibilities are there. And that's kind of why the Workhorse synth kind of fits this category. So that's definitely pretty amazing here. So that's the ARP, right? Another thing that I do want to talk about, and this is going to be the last thing. There's so many things we can talk about this synth, which is kind of crazy, but the zones tab. So you could basically split out your keyboard, and this is something that I really like as well. So you can have certain zones for different oscillators that you want to have, right? So maybe in a first octave zone that you want these things to control, like maybe oscillator 1 is going to be this octave, and the next octave down is going to be oscillator 2 and 3, and maybe the next one's going to be 4, however it is you want. And as you can see here, the drums is going to be in this area down over here, and this oscillator covers the entire keyboard. And we can see these live. So we can move this up here, and then these notes down here are not going to trigger this oscillator. Only once we get up here, it's going to trigger it. And we can fade these as well, which is insane. And then we have a velocity parameter for that as well. So that's kind of just, I guess, the few couple things that I kind of started writing down. I'm like, if I want a Workhorse synth, it kind of needs to cover a lot of these territories, and it does. And it's simple to use, and I think the interface is well designed, in my opinion. And like I said in the beginning, the most important part, I think, for me at least, is you're going to have fun inside these synthesizers. You have to feel good, and maybe some of them, like I said, sound good. They have all these options, but you just don't really vibe with it. You don't really feel comfortable in the sense. You might know how it all works and how it all puts together, but it's not really a pleasurable experience, and doing stuff and possibilities don't really feel like that great, or it's not really that easy to do. And here, I don't feel that. I feel it's like it's fun. It's a playground. So that's kind of why, personally, for my Workhorse synth, if I need to do crazy stuff or I just want to make some simple patches, Avenger 2 for me is the one I would pick. Not to say the others are bad or anything like that, but I think just personally for me, I think this one is my Workhorse one. So I'm curious for you guys, which one's your Workhorse? Did you guys end up with Falcon? Maybe you also ended up with Avenger, or maybe Faceplant, or maybe something else that I don't even know about. Or maybe you went the modular route, because that's a whole different topic for a whole different day. But yeah, let me know which one is your Workhorse synth. And yeah, thank you for watching. See you in the next one.